Athens. The year is 480 BC. If you were standing on the island of Salamis looking back at the mainland, you wouldn't see a golden city. You would see smoke. The Persian army under King Xerxes had just swept through Greece, smashed the defences at Thermopylae, and marched straight into an evacuated Athens. They looted the houses, they burned the temples on the Acropolis, and they smashed the statues of the gods. The city was a graveyard. It was a pile of ash and broken marble. For most civilizations in history, that's the end of the story. You get sacked, you get burned, you disappear. But the Athenians were different. They were stubborn, they were arrogant, and they had a vision. Over the next 50 years, under the leadership of a politician named Pericles, they didn't just rebuild their homes. They decided to build the greatest city the world had ever seen. They took the ruin of their city and turned it into the intellectual and artistic capital of the universe. I used modern AI tools to reconstruct ancient Athens at its absolute peak, around 430 BC, just before the plague and the war with Sparta brought it all crashing down. We aren't just going to look at wide shots. We are going to walk the streets, look at the construction techniques, sit in the jury boxes, and see what it actually felt like to live in the city that invented the Western world. We have to start at the center, the Acropolis, the high city. Geographically, it's a massive limestone rock rising 150 meters out of the Attic plain. It dominates everything. In the Mycenaean times, centuries earlier, this was a fortress where the kings lived. But by the 5th century BC, the kings were gone, and the rock belonged to the gods. Getting up there was a journey. You climbed a steep, winding path until you hit the Propylaea. This wasn't just a gate, it was a psychological barrier. It was a massive, complex marble gateway designed by the architect Menezocles. It cost a fortune to build. Some sources say it cost almost as much as the Parthenon itself. It was unfinished when the Peloponnesian War started, but even in its unfinished state, it was terrifyingly grand. As you walked up the ramp, the columns framed the sky, cutting out the rest of the world, so all you could see was the heavens. To your right, perched right on the edge of a sheer cliff drop, was the temple of Athena Nike. It's tiny compared to the other monsters on the hill, but it was crucial. This was the temple of victory. But there's a weird detail here that tells you everything you need to know about the Athenian mindset. In almost every other Greek city, statues of Nike, the goddess of victory, were depicted with wings. They believed victory flew from battle to battle. But here, the wooden statue inside was the Apteros Nike, the wingless victory. The legend says the Athenians clipped her wings so that victory could never fly away and leave the city. That is the level of confidence we are dealing with. Once you passed through the shadows of the Propylaea, the sunlight would hit you, and the view opened up, and you were staring at the masterpiece, the Parthenon. Now, we need to forget the image of the bleached white skeleton we see today. We have this idea that Greek art was pure, white, and restrained. That is completely wrong. In 430 BC, this building was a riot of color. It was gaudy. The friezes up top were painted in bright reds, deep blues, and heavy gold leaf. It wasn't subtle, it was loud. It was shouting at you. It was built to house the Athena Parthenos, a statue that was frankly insane. It stood 12 meters high. That's a 4-story building, inside the temple. It was a chryselephantine statue, which means it was made of ivory for the skin and over a ton of pure gold for the dress and armor. We don't have the original anymore. It's long gone, melted down or stolen, but records tell us something fascinating. The gold plates were removable. They were designed to be taken off. Why? Because the statue wasn't just an idol, it was the city's central bank vault. If Athens ever went broke or needed to fund a massive fleet for a war, they could literally melt the goddess down to pay the troops. Pericles actually told the citizens this during a speech, that the gold on the statue was a strategic reserve. The building itself, the Parthenon, is an engineering miracle that we still struggle to fully understand. It looks like a simple box of columns, right? Wrong. It is an optical illusion. There isn't a single straight line in the entire building. The floor is not flat, it curves upward in the middle. The columns are not straight. They bulge slightly in the middle, a technique called entasis, to make them look like they are straining under the weight of the roof, like a muscle flexing. And they aren't standing straight up. They lean inward by a few inches. If you extended the lines of the columns up into the sky, they would meet about a mile overhead. The architects, Ictinus and Callicrates, knew that straight lines look curved from a distance because of how the human eye works. If they had built it perfectly straight, it would have looked like it was sagging. So they built a distorted building to make it look perfect. It's a level of mathematical obsession that is hard to wrap your head around. Just across the way from the Parthenon stood the Erechtheion. If the Parthenon was the showpiece, this was the holy ground. It's a weird split-level building because the ground was uneven and they refused to level it because every inch of that rock was sacred. This is where the mythical contest for Athens happened. Legend says Poseidon struck the rock with his trident, creating a salt spring, and Athena planted an olive tree. The citizens had to choose. They chose the tree, peace and prosperity over the sea's anger. And that's why we call it Athens, not Poseidonia. On the side of this building is the famous Porch of the Maidens. Instead of columns, you have these 6 stone women, the Caryatids, holding up the roof. The weight they are carrying is massive, tons of stone, but look at their necks. They look graceful, effortless, their hair braided back to strengthen the neck structure without making it look thick. But standing between these two buildings was something that's totally gone today, something most people don't even know was there. But it was actually the first thing you saw, the Athena Promachos, a colossal bronze statue 9 meters high. She was the warrior. She stood guard over the city. The tip of her spear and the crest of her helmet were gold-plated. They reflected the sun so brightly that sailors out at sea, rounding the Cape of Sunion kilometers away, could see the glint of it and know they were almost home. It stood there for 1,000 years, until it was taken to Constantinople and eventually destroyed by a superstitious mob. Now, let's walk down from the gods and see where the real action happened. The Agora. This was the downtown. The Roman Forum was organized and imperial. The Agora was chaotic. It was a marketplace, a government center, and a school all at once. The noise would have been deafening. You'd have fishmongers shouting prices, slaves carrying water, pottery merchants banging clay pots, and right in the middle of it, philosophers like Socrates annoying people with questions. That long building with the double colonnade, that's the Stoa of Attalos. Think of it as an ancient mall. It had 42 shops on 2 levels. It was the place to be seen. You came here to get out of the brutal Greek sun, walk in the shade, hear the news, and maybe buy some imported wine or luxury fabric. It was loud, crowded, and full of life. Just above it sat the Hephaestion. It looks like a mini Parthenon, and remarkably, it's actually the best preserved temple in the entire Greek world. It still has its roof. It was dedicated to Hephaestus, the god of the forge, which makes sense because this whole area was the industrial district. Metalworkers, potters, blacksmiths, the smoke from their fires would have been drifting through here constantly. But the most important thing that happened in the Agora wasn't trade, it was law. The Heliia was the supreme court. But forget what you know about courts. There were no judges, no lawyers, no district attorneys. There was just the jury. And the juries were massive, 201, 501, sometimes over 1,000 people for a single trial. If you were accused of a crime, you had to stand up and defend yourself in front of 1,000 of your neighbors. The crowd decided your fate, and they were terrified of corruption, so they invented machines to ensure fairness. They had a device called the Cleroterion, a stone slab with slots and tubes that used colored dice to randomly select jurors just minutes before the trial started, so nobody could bribe them. They used a water clock, the clepsydra, to time speeches. It was a clay pot with a specific hole size. When the plug was pulled, the water drained. When the water ran out, your time was up. Rich or poor, famous or unknown, you got the same amount of water. And when it was time to vote, they used these bronze ballots, one with a solid hub for innocent, one with a hollow hub for guilty. You held the ballot between your fingers so no one could see the hub, and you dropped it in a bronze jar. It was the first secret ballot in history. Speaking of voting, we have to talk about the Pnyx. This is a rocky hill just west of the Acropolis. It doesn't look like much, just a flat area and some steps carved into rock. But this is the most important spot in Western political history. This is where the ecclesia met, the assembly. Every male citizen over 20 had the right to come here, stand on that stone platform, the bema, and speak to a crowd of 6,000 men. This wasn't like our democracy where we elect a guy to go make decisions for us. This was direct. They voted on everything right here. Raising taxes, vote. Going to war with Sparta, vote. Exiling a politician, vote. It was raw, it was loud, and it was dangerous. If the crowd hated your idea, they'd shout you down, throw rocks, or drag you off the stage. It was a system built on the idea that the collective wisdom of the crowd was better than any king. But it was also volatile. These same people voted to build the Parthenon, and a few years later, they voted to execute Socrates. Now, walking down the south slope of the Acropolis, we find the Theatre of Dionysus. This is literally the birthplace of show business. 17,000 people would pack onto these stone benches. This is where the plays of Sophocles, Euripides, and Aristophanes premiered. But it wasn't just entertainment, it was a religious festival. The acoustics were perfect. A coin dropped in the center of the orchestra could be heard in the back row, and look at the front row. Those are marble thrones. They have names carved into them. The center one, the fanciest one with the lion paws, was reserved for the high priest of Dionysus. Right next to it was a building that looked totally different, the Odeon of Pericles. It was the first roofed concert hall in history. It was a massive square building filled with a forest of columns to hold up the heavy roof. Legend says the timber for the roof came from the masts of captured Persian ships from the Battle of Salamis. It was designed to look like the tent of the Persian king Xerxes, a trophy of war turned into a music hall. While the theatre was for drama, this was for musical contests, singing and lyre playing. But Athens wasn't just a city of art and talk. It was a military superpower, and the source of that power was about 8 kilometers away at the Piraeus. Athens is inland. In the ancient world, if you get besieged and lose your port, you starve. So they did something crazy. They built the long walls, 2 massive stone walls, parallel to each other, running the full 6 kilometers from the city to the sea. It turned the road into a fortress. It essentially made Athens an island on land. The Spartans could burn the crops outside the walls all they wanted. As long as the ships could sail into Piraeus with grain from the Black Sea, Athens could never be starved out. Inside those walls, it was noisy, crowded, and smelled of the sea. And at the Piraeus, at the harbour of Zea, lay the real strength of the empire, the ship sheds. This was the garage for the navy, 170 dry docks housing the triremes. These ships were the fighter jets of the ancient world, long, sleek, built for one thing, ramming speed. They had a bronze battering ram at the front, 170 rowers, arranged in 3 banks, pulling in perfect unison. When they hit an enemy ship, it cracked it in half. And here is the thing that changed history. The guys rowing these ships weren't slaves. They were free citizens, the poorest class, called the Thetes. Because the safety of the city depended on them, they demanded political rights. You can't tell the guy saving your life he can't vote. The navy is the reason Athens became a democracy. But let's move away from the grand stuff. Where did regular people live? If you walked away from the Agora, the glamour disappeared fast. Athenian housing was shockingly simple. Public buildings were marble. Private homes were unbaked mud brick with clay tile roofs. The streets were narrow, winding, unpaved, and dark. There was no street lighting. If you went out at night, you brought a slave with a torch, or you risked getting mugged. There was no plumbing. You used a chamber pot and dumped it in the street. A typical house faced inward, a blank wall to the street, and everything centered around a courtyard. This was for privacy. If you were wealthy, you had a room called the andron. This was the man cave. It had an offset door, so people looking in the courtyard couldn't see inside, and a mosaic floor. This is where the symposium happened. The symposium wasn't a boring meeting, it was a drinking party. Men would recline on couches, drink wine mixed with water. Drinking it straight was considered barbaric, play music, and debate philosophy or politics all night. This is where the real networking of the ancient world happened. But the women were excluded. They lived in the gyneceum, the women's quarters, usually upstairs. Athenian society was incredibly sexist. Women couldn't own property, couldn't vote, and barely left the house without a male escort. For all its talk of freedom, Athens was a club for men. Just outside the city walls, you had the Promachos. This was the potter's quarter, where the famous Greek vases were made. The smoke from the kilns would have been thick here, but it was also the cemetery. The road leading out of the Dippolon Gate, the main gate of the city, was lined with massive grave markers and statues. And finally, we can't forget the Panathenaic Stadium. It's tucked away in a valley between two hills. This is where the Panathenaic Games were held, the Athenian version of the Olympics. The track was exactly 1 stadion long, about 185 meters. The athletes competed entirely naked, covered in olive oil. The prize wasn't gold, it was large jars of sacred olive oil from the groves of Athena. We actually still have this stadium today. It was rebuilt in marble for the first modern Olympics in 1896, and it sits on the exact footprint of the ancient one. But this golden age didn't last. It couldn't. In 431 BC, the war with Sparta began. The strategy of the long walls backfired. Pericles pulled the entire population of the countryside inside the walls for protection. It was too crowded. Hygiene collapsed. And then, the plague hit. We still aren't 100% sure what it was. Maybe typhoid, maybe smallpox, but it devastated the city. It killed a third of the population, including Pericles himself. The city descended into chaos. They recovered, kept fighting for 27 years, but eventually they lost. The Spartans tore down the long walls to the sound of flute music. The empire was over, but the blueprint they created never died. Look around the world today: Washington, D.C., London, Paris. Our government buildings have columns and triangular pediments because we are copying the Parthenon. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to understand the world faster, think sharper, and actually remember what you learn, Paladin is built for you.